Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Thomas Welch.
And I'm Josh Hyman.
We got a fun episode for you today because the St. Louis Blues are finally fully healthy. Brayden Schenn is off the injured reserve, onto the practice ice, and it sounds like he will be in the lineup for the Blues matchup tomorrow against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So we're going to preview that game against the Pittsburgh Penguins in our final segment. In our second segment, we're going to talk a little bit about trades, how this Blues team can improve, and what their odds look like for a push through the playoffs. In our first segment, we're going to be talking about this fully healthy team. But before we break that down, we want to thank you guys once again for making us your first listen of the day. If it's on your daily commute to work, to school, whatever it might be, if you're sipping on some Starbucks coffee just to try to keep your eyes open, you're stuck in traffic, whatever it might be, we thank you guys so much for starting your day off with the Locked On Blues. So that being said, Josh, I think Robert Thomas said it best. You said it best before the pod. This team, when it's at full capacity, full tilt, has 3 first lines, and we're going to see them in action against the Pittsburgh Penguins. How do you feel about Brayden Schenn coming back into the lineup and being a third liner? Huh? When was the last time we heard that? It's been a fat minute since Brayden Schenn.
Buchnevich is down there too.
Buchnevich is down there too.
Our best forward.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is this team is so deep and these players are so talented that any one of these lines could be interchangeable, could be the first line. Any of them could be that first line. So what are your thoughts going into this stretch against 2 future Hall of Famers and Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin in back-to-back games against the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Washington Capitals?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a heck of a long time since the Blues have had a fully healthy roster. It's almost been kind of easy to forget the fact that tremendous amounts of injuries isn't the norm for an NHL team, because it felt like every single time, it's a fact that every single time we've sat down to record this podcast since, I believe the date is November 25th, we've had a multitude of injuries to discuss, a multitude of lineup changes to discuss. It feels like every segment one of our podcast for the last month and a half has been, all right, and here are today's injuries. Here's who's not playing. Here's some guy that we've never heard of that's going to come up and take his place. And then the next day we'll be like, hey, that guy that we've never heard of, he's really good. So it's been a bumpy road since late November in terms of the injuries, and, looking at this roster and the Blues just piecing together the best full strength lineup that they can. Whether it's, the fun times a few weeks ago with 17 skaters or the emergency backup goalie, this has been a long time coming. And not only that, the Blues have performed so well with these injuries and with this adversity that it's even easier to forget that when fully healthy, this lineup just looks absolutely terrifying on paper, just because we haven't had that many games with a fully healthy lineup. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I assume it's less than 10,
it's got to be
15.
Less than a 50-50 split.
Yeah. So
sure.
It's been a rocky road in terms of that, but the record of the St. Louis Blues wouldn't tell you that. If you just looked at the wins and losses, you would have no idea that they've been hurting so much in terms of their lineup. So, the important thing for the St. Louis Blues is managing expectations, not getting too high on the fact that you've got guys coming back from injury and stuff, and having a fully healthy roster. Just do what you've been doing the past month and a half. That's been winning you games despite the injuries, and you're going to have even more success. Like I was saying, last week, the Blues splitting up the Russian line was disappointing, but it's also exciting to know that they're no longer just sort of a one-line team, because as dominant as that Russian line was, it was kind of the fact that if that line was off the mark, then you weren't getting any offense from anywhere else. Now, all of a sudden, you got a guy like Pavel Buchnevich on the third line, and then you got a guy like Jordan Kyrou on the second line, and you got a guy like Ryan O'Reilly on the first line. And it's like everywhere you turn, if you're playing the St. Louis Blues, you just got dynamic, high skill, high scoring forward up and down the line, and it's gonna be a nightmare for Pittsburgh tomorrow night.
Yeah, and one of those things that it feels great to me is knowing that I feel like earlier on in their careers, and I feel like even maybe earlier on this season, um, Craig Berube was reluctant to put Jordan Cairo and Robert Thomas with each other on the same line, just because anytime you have young guys uh, in this league that are still developing and still kind of finding their footing at the NHL level, you want to pair them with veterans as much as possible to help like train them and let them know like, hey, it's the little things, and like tell them what to do and tell them when they mess up and all those things. So him having the confidence to put Robert Thomas and Jordan Cairo on the same line speaks dividends to where they're at in their development and how much trust the coach has in not only their offensive talent, because I think that's been prevalent since day one, but defensively, back checking. I mean, like we said, all of these guys could be first lines at any point in time, and Craig Berube utilizes them like that. He doesn't care who's out there. If it's Nathan McKinnon in the top line of the Colorado Avalanche, he's going to send out Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, and Vladimir Tarasenko and be confident that they're going to lock it down defensively. And so far this season, they've been able to do that. But for as much as we love the fact that the Blues are looking like they're fully healthy, their bench is not. Steve Ott and Van Ryn will not be available to coach the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So head coach Drew Bannister of the Springfield Thunderbirds will be called up to assist the St. Louis Blues on
Can't
the bench.
catch a
As much as
break.
can't catch a break, man. But the players are all there, and that's when fully healthy, the guys on the ice are putting in the work, and they're going to be firing on all cylinders. And one of the guys that we haven't talked about yet, but I think is going to be a big part, and equally, maybe not equally, but just as influential in his return is Robert Bertuzzo, who Lou Korak reported today, and Craig Berube said that the next time that they practice, he will be on the ice. So potentially we could be looking at him slotted back in the lineup for the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins as well. And Josh and I were kind of talking before the podcast. It's going to be curious to see who is the odd man out there, because you like right off the bat, you kind of think like, well, Perunovich is the young guy. Like he's not going to get that many minutes. It's easy to just pull him out and slot Bertuzzo in there. But at the same time, Perunovich is a force to be reckoned with on the power play. He's got that skating ability, and he's proven that those stretch passes are lethal, and he can hold his own defensively. So I would not be surprised to see Perunovich, because he's left-handed, take the spot of Scandella on the left side, and then you put Bertuzzo in there, and then that kind of rounds it out. But that also would create waves with a veteran player, so you never really know what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I think it's a good problem to have. At the beginning of the season, over the first few games, and something we're going to be talking about in segment 2, this defense really felt like it had a big hole in terms of personnel, and it really felt like you couldn't find the right guys to play at any spot. The power play wasn't doing well from a defensive standpoint. Penalty kill, they were struggling as well. And then just 5-on-5, the defense was a mess. Now all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, flip the script, and we're looking at it and be like, dang, we got too many NHL caliber guys at the defensive position. What are we going to do? I definitely think that the simple solution, is to take Perunovich out. I know you were reading off some of his ice time before the game, and he was getting 6-7 minutes per game, and seems like a no-brainer if you're looking at it that way.
There was one game he had 8, but the most recent games he's had like 13.
Yeah, so seems like kind of a no-brainer if you're looking at it from a pure ice time perspective. But then if you're looking at it from a personnel perspective, you can say, well, can you replace Scott Perunovich on the power play? Or would it be easier to replace Marco Scandella on the penalty kill? And if you're looking at it from a pure special teams perspective, I think you can argue that Robert Bertuzzo can come in and do a good job on the penalty kill, more so than he could come in and help the power play, which obviously, he's not exactly even though he was at forward for a couple games.
The Sellies are always top notch, though. The Sellies are.
Oh my god,
I
I need a Bortuzzo goal soon. We haven't had one in too long. Well, if I had to make a prediction, I would say Perunovich will be the guy that comes out of the lineup. Just on penalty kill is a little bit more important than power play in terms of firepower. The Blues aren't having a ton of trouble scoring. They'd probably rather sacrifice offense from their defense rather than defense from their defense. But then again, it could be more of a matchup based thing. If you're playing a team that has, a lot of big bruising forwards, you might want to keep Scandella and Bortuzzo in the lineup. But if you're playing a team that plays a little bit more east to west, fast paced style, it might be a time to have a guy like Scott Perunovich in the lineup. And with the addition of the taxi squad as well, it makes it a lot more likely that we see Perunovich and, other guys just kind of filtering in and out of the lineup back and forth. So I don't think this spells the end of Perunovich's, spot in the lineup this season. I think it might end up being a little bit matchup based, like I was saying, depending on who the Blues are playing and the type of system that they're running. You might see them go with offense versus defense in terms of the matchups there. But, overall, it's a good problem to have and not one I was expecting to be talking about at the beginning of the season with the way that this defense was looking.
Yeah, and something else I wasn't expecting to be talking about is Jacob Chikrin potentially being traded from the Arizona Coyotes. Sounds like the Arizona Coyotes are looking for a Jack Eichel type return, which is
Crazy.
Definitely a conversation point. So we're going to get into that as well as St. Louis Blues trades, how they could potentially improve their team moving forward and going through the playoffs. But before we get into that, I want to remind you guys about our friends over at Primal Origin Oils, because if you have a beard, you need to get Primal. That's right. If you have a beard, you need to get Primal. If you or someone you care about has a beard, it needs to get Primal. Maybe you're that guy who has never considered the benefits of treating your beard with product. Primal Origin Oils will stop the itch and make your beard look healthy and groomed. The products are free from harmful synthetic ingredients and with low impact on our planet. Primal Origin Oils makes balms, oils, and whipped butter that are renowned as the best feel in beard products available. All products are fair trade certified and handcrafted in the USA. The combo kits make a great holiday gift, and if you're shopping for yourself, you'll be glad that you did. And we know that every company claims to have the best, but Primal Origin Oils challenges you to compare their ingredients and the feel in beard to the other products that you've used. We promise you will see and feel the difference. So use the code LOCKEDON, and that'll get you 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 20% off. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, Josh. So if you're the Arizona Coyotes, I would understand why you would want the horse, or maybe all 7 horses and the barn in return for him. But I think the likelihood of that happening for the St. Louis Blues is just not in the cards. I understand he's a scoring defenseman off the small sample size that he's had. His analytics look fantastic. His plus minus might not, but we know that that's a very fickle stat, especially when you're playing for a team that is like minus 60 in goal differential on the season. Like, no one's on that team is going to have a good plus minus. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. Ryan O'Reilly wouldn't either. And we saw that when he played with the Sabres, he didn't have a good plus minus. And now with the Blues, he's one of the best two-way forwards in the league. So that being said, Josh, are you in or are you out still on Chikrin? And if you are out, how do you think this Blues team can improve? I know we've talked about defensemen all season long. It seems like that is the one thing that this team is potentially missing. Do you think they make a trade soon? Do you think they make a trade at the deadline? Do you think they stay pat? What are your thoughts here on the trade circus that is the St. Louis Blues and the mastermind that is Doug Armstrong?
Yeah, I think every team in the NHL wants a guy like Jacob Chikrin. He's sort of an example of the new wave of NHL defensemen, sort of guys that can do it all, not just play well in their own end, but generate offense as well. And like you said, it is a limited sample size, but there's no reason to believe that he's not going to continue to produce, moving forward. And especially when you look at the fact that he has been on an Arizona Coyotes team that has had trouble scoring goals since the beginning of time. You wonder what
scoring goals. Just a subtle reminder that Jacob Chikrin scored more goals last year than any other defenseman, and that includes Cale Makar. So,
yeah.
As much as we like to poke fun at the Coyotes and say like, "Hey, like, oh yeah, you got the next Jack Eichel defenseman, you're gonna want the barn for him, sure," but like, they very well could, and he's very young, and his contract is incredibly team friendly. So,
yeah, if I'm the Coyotes, I'm not looking to move Jacob Chikrin. He's sort of the one bright spot that they've got going for them right now, or one of the few, I guess. But
so
the flip side of that,
around him.
You might, but the thing with that is I don't know if he's that type of player. I don't know if he's a franchise cornerstone type. He's really, really good, and that, like I was saying, I think if any NHL team is finding out that he's available, you ring up you say, hey, what's the asking price is really, a Jack Eichel type return. I don't see it happening this season. I mean, look how long it took for the Jack Eichel trade to come together. It was, a year in the making almost. And that's just hard to throw together at the trade deadline. If you're, gutting that many roster players in order to bring in one guy, it's just tough. No contender is really going to want to do that. And especially the St. Louis Blues, who are already right up against the cap. And their forward depth is great, but I don't think it's great to the point where you can justify sacrificing 1, 2, 3 of those guys plus prospects and picks to bring in one guy for your defense. I just don't know if that makes sense for the St. Louis Blues.
Here's
that
a
being
fun
said,
for you. That's gonna hurt.
I wonder if you're gonna say exactly what I was about to say. So hit me.
Did you just do a jinx real fast?
We might be.
If Arizona comes calling to Doug Armstrong and says, "Hey, we are interested in Vladimir Tarasenko. We're willing to
I knew
offer
it.
you Jacob Chychrun." What do you say, Josh? What do you say? I'm sure it's not going to be. I'm sure that's not going to happen.
Right.
But if that does happen, even if the Blues have to add, I'm probably saying yes.
Look, at the beginning of the season, or at the beginning of this Tarasenko trade saga, we said the Blues need one thing if they're getting a Tarasenko return, and that is a potential cornerstone defenseman to try to replace, Alex Pietrangelo. Led the league in scoring last year for a defenseman. Young, team-friendly contract. If you're still trading Vladimir Tarasenko, that might be the perfect trade for the St. Louis Blues. Obviously, easier said than done. Like you said, I don't think it's going to be that simple. And unfortunately, I think if it comes time, maybe it's the offseason when he gets traded, I think there would be better offers out there than just Vladimir Tarasenko straight up. So I think the Blues would have to add. I think it would probably have to be Tarasenko, a guy like Klim Kostin, another prospect, and then a couple picks. It would be a big, hefty trade. But the flip side of that is if Tarasenko's going regardless and you kind of look at it as trading him rather than losing him for nothing, I'm all for it. Obviously a huge hypothetical, but I'm all for it.
And here's the thing with that is I am with everyone that I love Vladdy, want him to stay here for the rest of his career, right? I would love for him to retire a St. Louis Blue. That being said, with the recent article by Mike McKenna that came out that was basically doubling down on what Jeremy Rutherford said and saying the latest is he still wants out. What I'm scared of is keeping Vladdy for too long, and then maybe next season he kind of returns back to form and doesn't have that fire and doesn't tear it up like he is this season. You want to sell at the highest, and if you can get a guy in return like Jacob Chychrun, who is 23 years old, like we talked about, led all defensemen in goal scoring last season, including Cale Makar, had 41 points last season as a D-man. His analytics look fantastic. And like you said, team-friendly deal. Just how team-friendly is it, Josh? 6 years at $27 million. That's a $4.6 million cap hit for a guy that led the entire league in goals scored. How many goals did he score? Dude, 18 goals as a D-man.
In 60 games.
I understand. Yeah, I understand that 56 games. 18
could have been a 30 goal scorer.
And he's a big dude. This is not a Vince Dunn kind of, or it's not even like a Cale Makar kind of shifty speedster guy. I feel like we have that in Perunovic. Maybe not. I don't know. The jury's still out on him, right? But you have that archetype in a guy like Perunovic. Jacob Chychrun is 6'2", 220 pounds. So he's not that, but he can potentially be a franchise player. And that's the kind of risk you run when you're trading a guy like Vladdy. But if you can get a contract like this, I mean, Doug has to be thinking about it, right? He's got to be kicking the tires at some point.
Flip side of that is you look at his stats this season. I know the Arizona Coyotes have been absolutely god awful, but 26 game played, 2 goals, 5 assists, 7 points, not quite matching the pace of his last season. So, the flip side of that is, his team is really poor this season. It could be chalked up to that. But if last season was an anomaly, and he really is just sort of a middle of the lineup defenseman, and you're paying, an arm and a leg to try to bring him in, and he disappoints, could be a franchise crippling move if you're dumping that many players for a guy like him, for an Eichel-like return for a guy that only has one successful season. Just playing devil's advocate. Not saying I agree with that, but it is definitely.
I agree with you. But how much? And so my rebuttal to that is how much of a Jack Eichel return does Vladimir Tarasenko take up at this point in stage in the season, right? Because I feel like it has to be like
A lot.
Yeah, if they're genuinely interested in Vladimir Tarasenko and said like, "Hey, we'd be interested in moving Jacob Chikrin for him," I can't imagine that they'd be like, "Oh, well, we also want a first round pick and your top rated prospect and like all of these guys as well." I think they would definitely want something along the lines like to go with Vladdy because he's going to be a free agent soon. But I think there's going to be a lot of value placed in him. But I don't know. They could also just be like, "Hey, we're trying to win, so we don't want Vladdy." And I don't know. To be fair, I really don't know why they would trade for Vladdy. But hypothetically, I do think the Blues would benefit from that trade. So hopefully they benefit in their next game up against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So we're going to preview that when we come back. So don't go anywhere. All right, Josh. So we were looking at standings before the podcast started. It looks like in terms of record, these teams are right there next to each other, right
Identical.
neck and neck.
19-9-5, 18-8-5, I believe.
Penguins have a couple guys that have been playing above expectations, including a certain Evan Rodriguez, who is just absolutely soaring. His stock is through the roof this season. He's on my fantasy team, so it's going to be the one game that I'm not rooting for him. Jake Gensel has 30 points on this, or 29 points on the season for the Penguins, leads the team. Chris Letang looks like he's 25 years old, slinging the puck around. And Sid the Kid is still a point per game, even though he's missed some games this season. So, Josh, how do you think the Blues will be successful in their endeavors against the Pittsburgh Penguins? And do you think they will come out on top in this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get East Coast versus West Coast, or Eastern Conference versus Western Conference matchup, I should say, it's going to be a little different than your typical, Central Division grudge match. It's been kind of the case for the past few years that Eastern Conference teams have been a little more, speed and skill based, and the Western Conference teams have been kind of grinded out, physical style, and I think that's kind of true this season. Maybe not quite to the same extent that it was in years past, but I still think the sentiment holds that you're really just trying to go in and play your game. If you're the St. Louis Blues, you're not trying to do anything fancy. You're not going to read up on too much film and try to match what the Pittsburgh Penguins are doing, because it's a team that you're only going to be playing twice this season. And it's more about getting to your game and doing what you can do successfully rather than beating the Pittsburgh Penguins at their game. So that being said, anytime you're going up against Sidney Crosby and, Evgeny Malkin, that roster is dangerous, every time. So, like I said, you got to go out and do the things that you've been doing if you're the St. Louis Blues that have brought you success, especially with a fully healthy roster. You can't get too high on that. You can't say, "Oh, now that we're fully healthy, we can take our foot off the gas a little bit." That's how that's how you get into a stretch of losing. So it's a good first step into what is hopefully a long stretch of play where the Blues are fully healthy. Keep it simple, like we kind of saw in the Winter Classic when they started scoring goals. They just simplified their game a little bit, made the right play every single time. I think that's the key is keeping things simple. Just making the right play. One shift after another, not trying to do too much out there, and then they should be able to come away with a win.
Yeah, I think so too. And it sounds like the most recent report I saw said Yari should be out of COVID protocol. They also just got Brian Rust back, and Kapanen should be back in the lineup as well. So as much as we're talking about this Blues team getting fully healthy, those are some pretty solid names back in the lineup for the Pittsburgh Penguins too. So they're definitely going to have to come to play, and they're definitely going to have to give 110% out there and play a full 60, all the cliches. So our favorite cliche on the show is locked on player of the game.
Yes, sir.
And I said it at the end of the last episode. It was the buzzer beater, right? And I said these next two games, because they're going up against Sid the Kid, who is a role model for so many young hockey players growing up. I think Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas fit in that mold. Ovechkin, absolute same storyline. So I'm going to take I want to take Jordan Kyrou bad, but I always like, me, Josh, I love the dark horse. I love the underrated story, and I love the players that you don't expect to come out and rise out of the ashes and put on a show. So I'm going to say Robert Thomas as my locked on player of the game. Still doubling down on the multi-point game for both of them, but I'm taking Rob Tom.
All right. I like that. I think that's a solid choice. I got two guys that I'm kind of throwing around back and forth. One guy I think I'm not going to pick, but I am going to cheat a little bit and give my reasoning why I would have picked him, and that's Ryan O'Reilly. A guy that's kind of flown under the radar this season a little bit, hasn't been asked to propel the offense quite as much as in years past, still has been just as dominant in every other aspect of his game, but because he's only, I think, 7th on the team in points, hasn't gotten quite as much attention. But he is the type of guy that steps up in these games and, plays well, will lock down Sidney Crosby, et cetera, et cetera. We've heard that narrative 1,000 times before. But one narrative I've been talking about a whole lot this season up until late is Ivan Barbashev. A guy that has been the epitome of what's given the Blues success this season is, you go up against Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich and Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly. And the list goes on, and you're just exhausted. You're like, oh my God, how many skilled forwards did this team got? And then you see 49 hop over the ice. And you're like, oh, Barbashev, that's that kind of that two-way pest from last season, right? Because that's what he's been. And then all of a sudden, Barbashev's going up and down the ice, making passes left and right, banging bodies, scoring goals, career high in points, less than halfway into the season. He is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back when it comes to defending the St. Louis Blues, in my opinion. I think that's why he's had so much success this year. On that line with Barbashev or with Buchnevich and Tarasenko, sort of that third wheel almost, but has had so much success because all the attention has been on Buchnevich and Tarasenko. Now on that third line with Buchnevich, Schenn, I want to say. So once again, sort of the third wheel in terms of attention from the other team. Doesn't mean he's going to be the third most productive forward. I think he's going to go out and really thrive. Like I said, when it comes to keeping it simple, no one better than Ivan Barbashev. He's Mr. Reliable out there. You know what you're getting out of him night in, night out. I'm looking to watch him continue his hot stretch as of late in his career-defining season. Maybe get a couple points. A couple big hits against the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm excited. That's why I'm choosing Ivan Barbashev as my thought of the game.
I like that pick a lot, honestly. Especially we keep talking about going up against the East Coast team. I feel like the grinding style of that third line with a guy like who's not afraid to bang bodies, and all three of them, Buchnevich, Barbashev, and Schenn, are gonna go out there.
Say those names 5 times fast.
Buchnevich, Barbashev, and Schenn are all gonna go out there and not be afraid to knock your teeth down your throat. And I think as talented as the Penguins are and as skilled as they are, I'm not sure they're going to have an answer for that line. So I love that pick, Josh. And I love this podcast, but unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you guys so much for listening and tuning in. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever platform you're currently listening to, and subscribe to us on YouTube. I think we're still pretty close to 100 subscribers on there. And we love interacting with you guys and replying to those comments. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. You can follow me on Twitter at Twelcher15. You can follow Josh on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. But like I said, thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.